Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Women's Wednesdays. My name is Aneesah Abdullah, and I will be your guest moderator for tonight. So as you know, Women's Wednesdays is a monthly event that's hosted by Equality Bahamas. It's a space where women get together to discuss issues that affect women in particular. Please ignore the dogs. I can't do anything about that. I wish I could mute them. Can't do that. And so you'll have them as our background, except for when our speakers have their input. And so there have been sessions in the past on Women's Wednesdays about personal financial management, constitutional reform, self-care, and a range of other issues. And as you know, pre-COVID, it was hosted at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. And so now we're in this virtual space, and we're happy to have you all here. So you're familiar with the format, those of you who are regulars, but for those who are not, we'll spend the first portion of this evening engaging directly with the panelists, but feel free to post your comments and questions in the chat box throughout the conversation. They will be monitored by Alicia and Lauren. Also, as you know, key ground rules are that no sexism, racism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, or any kind of hate or disrespect will be tolerated. Anyone violating these rules will be removed. So just so you know that. And if you're having any technical issues, I'm having technical issues, and I believe everyone who's using Alive and Cable Bahamas tonight, we're having technical issues. And so if you're having any technical issues, just let us know, and Alicia or Lauren will be happy to assist you. So let's get right to it. So we often hear about, when we're talking about women's leadership, we have our own notions. We come to the table with our own perceptions about what this should look like. And society also has its own idea, generally speaking, of what women's leadership should look like. And when we hear this term, it's usually in the context of women in politics, in the civil service, in the private sector, etc. So tonight, we'll be talking about redefining leadership with our amazing panelists who are leaders in a wide range of spheres. Actually, we have the media represented, the nonprofit sector represented, we have the entrepreneurial space represented, as well as the religious sphere represented. And these are all critical components of national development. So it extends beyond the conversation that's usually around women in politics. Although again, we're going to come back to policy because the work that you do is tied to that, particularly from an advocacy standpoint. So I'd like to kick off the session, I'd like to introduce have our panelists actually introduce themselves. So to start, I'll have Kentisha tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. My normal greeting is, what's poppin'? I am the owner of Pop Stop Handcrafted Gourmet Popsicles. I would say pioneer in the field. We were one of the first people making gourmet popsicles, but we were eating cup and baggy all of our lives. I actually started my venture selling cup and baggy, and I was like, I just want to show people how I'm gonna upgrade the cup and baggy and actually create an industry out of it. So I started that with Pop Stop. After teaching with Pop Stop, I got the opportunity to actually become a lecturer at BTVI. So I've also been teaching entrepreneurship at BTVI for the past 6 years. And I've had an amazing experience getting the ability to inspire other entrepreneurs to make something out of nothing as well.
Thank you for that, Kentisha. And we look forward to hearing a lot more from you about women in the entrepreneurial space. All right, Kasarina.
You're muted, Kasarina.
I was having a great conversation with myself. Sorry about that. So I'm Katerina McKinney-Lambert. I'm the executive director of Brief, which is a non-governmental organization established in 1993 to promote the conservation of the Bahamian marine environment that sustains our way of life. Really looking at how how humans interact with the natural world around us, and particularly in the ocean. And this is an area that historically women haven't been very involved in, getting in the ocean. So it's something that I care very much about. I'm from the island of, I was born in Governor. I taught at the Island School and the Cape Eleuthera Institute before joining Brief. I went to Duke University. And I'm also very involved with the One Eleuthera Foundation, which is a really exciting program on Eleuthera. And several committees, including the National Biodiversity Committee, the Climate Change Committee, the Sustainable Development Goals Unit in the Office of the Prime Minister. It's great to be led by Aneesah, who's doing a tremendous job there. And I also work with the United World College National Committee. I spent 2 years in Wales doing the International Baccalaureate there. There's a lot of discussion about leadership and what global leadership means through that. So I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion with all of you.
Thank you for that, Katerina, and it's happy to be with you in this space. Philippa. I'm not sure if I froze or if Philippa froze. So I'm not frozen, good. Okay, Philippa, can you hear me? All right, in the meantime, let's move on to Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly Jolly. I'm from Nassau, Bahamas. I'm an ordained minister. I've served in, I spent 7 years in Jamaica between seminary and some full-time ministry, and transferred back home in 2017, where I've been working. And yeah, it's a pleasure to partner with Equality Bahamas. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. I'm really excited to hear, you know, your viewpoint, particularly from the religious perspective. So happy to have you here as well. Ava?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks for including me, giving me this opportunity to speak on women in leadership in the media space. I'm a journalist first and foremost. I currently work as head of digital at Eyewitness News, which is a broadcast station that with an online news component. Before that, I worked 10 years in print journalism with the Tribune. It was very formative for me and a really great experience. And I'm pretty sure I've either interviewed or met each and every one of you through that or in another walk of life. So it's great to commune with you ladies, and I look forward to productive discussion.
All right, thank you for that, Ava. Yeah, and definitely the media plays a key role in either perpetuating, you know, certain stereotypes or advocating for greater equality. I mean, it really depends on how you use it and what's allowed to be filtered through the media. And I'm talking about traditional media. Social media is experiences and viewpoints, et cetera, that are available for individual to digest and share. My internet connection is unstable yet again. All right, so let's see if Philippa can hear us. Philippa?
Good
Hi,
evening, everyone.
Philippa, how are you?
Hi.
Go ahead.
Good, thanks.
Tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Certainly. Before I begin, I just want to apologize on behalf of Cable Bahamas and my internet connection tonight. Hopefully there is some stability. If you see me drop off and don't return, then it's not you, it's not me, it's them. So my name is Philippa Dean. I am the executive director and founder of the Dignified Girl Project. We were founded in just 2017. I am also a trained psychotherapist, as well as a mommy of a toddler. So the dogs in the background are nothing compared to what's gonna happen in a few minutes in this background. I am a former educator of about 12 years, and I think that's about it. I'm excited to be a part of this panel, and thank you so much, Alicia and your team, for having me.
Well, thank you for that, Philippa. Yes, the dogs are going to be, that's going to just be our soundtrack for the night, for as long as my mic is unmuted. So that's not going to happen too frequently tonight. We want to hear from our panelists, and so just to dive right into it, your spheres are very different, and I just want to know from each of you, and I think the audience also would love to know, how essential it is to have feminist leadership in your respective sector. So I'd actually like to start with Kelly to hear, what are your views and why is it essential to bring, and not just a woman in leadership, but someone who cares about women's issues in your particular sphere?
All right, good night again, everyone. I like that question. Why is it important to have feminist views in our space? And I guess the most simple way of putting it would be that, I don't think if nobody else looks out for us, it should be us, you know what I mean? I even remember being in seminary and in a class with Burchell Taylor. He's a Baptist theologian over there in Jamaica. And he's like, the women in this class, you need to begin to look at scripture from your own perspective if you haven't already, because no one else is going to do it for you. And if you look at the church, most churches are predominantly made up of female membership. But then if you look at the leadership, it's predominantly male. And yet when you sit in conferences and councils, you still hear the complaint, why aren't the men, joining? Why aren't the men working? Is it because we have become too feminine? Are they threatened by the feminine presence? And I don't think that's a fair approach to the way things are. So in terms of the importance of having a feminist perspective, I think it's something that's revolutionary in the church, whereas it shouldn't be. The church is a few steps behind everyone else, because even the word feminist is a dirty word in 2020 in a church, in most church settings, I would say. So I see it as important from my role as pastor, first to help persons to seek equality, first of all, to see each other as necessary, to see the presence of women in the church, not just as a supportive role, but as a role that is needed in leadership, and a role that is going to point the way to the future of a successful church. And it has to, that kind of perspective has to open the clergy in general. And I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think when we look at the socialization spaces and spheres, it's really important, I think, to kind of embrace diversity. And it's really interesting to see that happen. And I think that the impact and the spillover effect of that can only be positive. And so when we're talking about socialization and areas of socialization, the media plays a huge role with respect to that. So Ava, just tell us a little bit about, your views on feminist leadership in your sector, the traditional media sector in the Bahamas, and just give us an idea and a lay of the land, and some of the work that you think needs to be done in that sphere and why it's so important.
Okay, so when I first got started in news was in 2009. If you could believe it, I looked even more radical than I do now. And one of the things that I like what you said about it's about taking up space, right? It's about one of the things I sort of my guiding principles is that it's sort of like if you build it, they will come. So if you present as yourself, authentically as yourself, people will be left with no choice than to include you or exclude you. And then once they do that, at least you know where you stand and you can fight your way up, you know, you can continue to punch up. But if you don't present as your authentic self, then how do you know whether or not, is it that society is censoring you, or is it that you're self-censoring? And so I start with that. And whenever people ask about, you know, my trajectory in news, and I can honestly say that I could probably got to where I am a lot faster. And that's not a knock to myself, but not gassing myself, but I definitely took a hard approach and took my own way, you know, slow way to sort of punch my way up, simply because I was unwilling to compromise on anything about myself. And you know, back then it was more so of just I just couldn't understand, or I didn't see the value in the societal roles that we had, and I didn't see. To me, they didn't make any sense, so I decided that I wasn't going to follow them. Now that's a privilege also. You know, both of my parents went to college, so I was able to also, in turn, it was easy for me to go to college. And that concept of higher education was not something that was so far removed from me. That was something that I always knew that I would do, right? So my outward appearance didn't have as much of a negative impact as it would have on someone that perhaps did not come from such a privilege, who would have to depend on the societal norms in order to get by. So I don't say that to say that, oh, anyone, you just, you know, present how you present and it'll all work out. But I say that because I can honestly say that I've seen this wall that exists, right? And even that exists for women in leadership, and especially women that don't present in a way that is that can be commodified or sexually sexually gratified for men, right? So if men don't see you as beautiful or someone that they want to be with or have around, or an object that they can claim or possess, then your ability to your upward mobility in any institution or space in the Bahamas is stunted, and that's just the bottom line. So when we so taking it from that, right, that's just the way it is. It's not negative or positive. That's our society. So we have to embrace that. We all participate in holding that up, myself included, in the things that we consume and how we live our lives. But in media, it was really important for me to come into the space, and I think that's why I'm still here, is because when I started, there were about 2 other women who had dreadlocks in news, working in news full-time as a journalist. And there was no one with what you would say locks like that looked like mine, right? And then going further than that. And the reason why it's important is because the reason why I feel particularly passionate about showing up as you are and not as society tells you, is because we will never break the stigma of having to look a certain way if we continue to look that certain way. Yeah. So so it's just about interrogating why you do the things that you do. So this is not the same thing as, this is not a natural hair versus permed hair thing. This is about, are you living for yourself? Are you getting dressed and beautifying yourself for yourself because it makes you feel good? Or are you doing it because you know that this is what Kempt, or this is what a woman of that goes to work, you know, how she's supposed to look, how she's supposed to act. Not without, you know, I feel like I'm rambling now, but just to give you an example, when I first got into news, I had an assignment at the House of Assembly, and they wouldn't let me into the House of Assembly actually because they said my shoes were too dirty. Yeah. And they and it was such a funny thing, and for the next 2 years, I would have this thing with this one this one House police officer, and he would choose something each time that it would be. So one time it was my shoes were too dirty. One time it's because my hair wasn't tied up, and so I tied up my hair, and then it was just that it was. It was too unkempt, and then one time it was because I wasn't dressed appropriately. Yeah. I think I may have been wearing jeans. Yeah. One time it was because I was wearing sandals that weren't like closed. I mean, the level of things. Yeah. But what I was facing, and what I didn't realize at the time, because I was just new, so I didn't realize that he was actually an obstacle. I didn't see him as an obstacle at the time. And maybe that was how I managed my sanity to get through it, because I always thought that it was something that I was doing. I was like, oh no, this is a fair game, right? But I didn't realize that there was nothing I could have done to present. There's no way that that was satisfactory. But because I kept coming back, I kept showing up, I kept going there, and I had the Tribune that really believed in me and my talent.
Yeah.
So they kept putting me out there in the field and said, well, just go back. Oh, just go back. Well, that's not fair. Just go back.
No,
And so
yeah.
by
Yeah.
showing up in the space, now I'm, I'm still here, and I haven't compromised on anything that I feel,
Right.
how I want to present. But
Yeah.
it is definitely, it's not a passive thing that you do. It's an active fight every day to show up in the space.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because you also discuss the evolution of, what it means to be a woman in media, and that outward presentation matching up with the expectation of what it means to be just a woman leader, I think, and not just a woman in media, but making sure that, and it is true, trying to fit into boxes is, it's just not sustainable. It's not sustainable, I think. And I think for everyone on this call, everyone shows up and they are who they are. And sometimes it's a journey to get there for individuals. And it's difficult for some people to arrive to that point. But, one of the things about women's leadership, we often pigeonhole women in terms of their focus on particular issues. And so when they show up in certain spaces, I think it's like, okay, so what are you doing here? Kasarina, you mentioned about tackling environmental issues, and how it was predominantly a male space. You're there. And there are a few other women who are leading the charge on environmental protection and trying to have sustainable responses to the climate crisis, et cetera. So tell us a little bit about not only the importance of having a feminist perspective, but how you make that connection of issues that impact women and girls and link that to the work that you do.
Yeah, so I think it's an issue that, of course, is relevant to all of us. Certainly, just sort of taking a little step back and thinking about science in general has been something that really has been, for many years, for centuries, it was a male sphere. And now we are in a position where we have incredible scientists who are women, who happen to be women, whether that's Mae Jemison, who's an astronaut, or Sylvia Earle, Dr. Sylvia Earle, Dr. Mae Jemison, who's an ocean aquanaut. But I think I've often found that women see connections in a way that sometimes men don't see. And really see, there's kind of a divide. Some scientists are very strict and they're saying, well, I'm just going to do the science. And others are saying, well, I want to connect this with how we connect with the planet, and feel this responsibility, this burning responsibility, if you know something, to share that and use that to make a difference. And there are certainly men who do that, but a lot of the women scientists who I've seen are, and I'm one of them, feel that need to communicate the issues in a way that can reach a lot of different people, and use that to change things. I do like to jump back to the Sustainable Development Goals, and use that as a framework for how we are doing conservation for the benefit of the planet, but also for the benefit of people who depend on the planet. And I think that's a really useful framework to look at, because it's not just about the environment, it's about human well-being and food security and fresh water and clean energy. And I think sometimes we as a society lose focus on what's really important. But being able to use these goals to drive us down this path is essential. I think representation is critical for women in science, and I love highlighting other women who are doing amazing things. Dr. Nicholas Smith, for example, is an incredible Bahamian who's working in Canada, and she's done these huge catch reconstructions looking at Bahamian fisheries over the last 180 years. Dr. Krista Sherman is out there studying Nassau grouper. And I think that there's a lot that we can do as women to highlight and elevate what other women are doing in the pure sciences and how that's being applied to sustainability issues going forward.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And in that last portion of your intervention, you mentioned the idea of operating collaboratively. And, oftentimes we view this individual leader and we associate it with individual characteristics. And in some spaces, that kind of individual, self-motivated energy is required. So I'm going to turn to Kantisha. And I think that, trying to look at leaders in the entrepreneurial space, women leaders in the entrepreneurial space. And, when we talk about leadership, we often talk about certain traits and certain processes, which makes leadership effective. And we usually, again, and we started out with this, assign certain characteristics to men versus women. But in the entrepreneurial space, what are some of those critical elements of leadership? And how did you see that bear out? And I know before you entered the entrepreneurial space, you were in the private sector. So there were some moments, I'm sure, that kind of defined for you what kind of leadership style you'd adopt going forward. So if you could speak on those issues.
In the private sector, I could tell, I worked a lot in the hotel industry. So the private sector was mainly male dominated when I was in that industry. We had women who held prominent positions, but I came from the industry of the Stuart Bowes, where we had heavy male leadership. And women had influence, but not as much. And me, I've always been very outspoken, and I've always been, I could say, a leader. I've always wanted to go in my own direction. So working in the hotel was tough, to say the least. Too many chiefs, not enough Indians. So I was like, I want to be an entrepreneur because I'm hardworking, but I want to be able to see the gains for myself. And I also want to be able to create a future and a legacy for whatever comes behind me. So entrepreneurship is very, very important for me. My mother isn't an entrepreneur. She knows nothing about entrepreneurship. So I wanted to be able to show my little sister how important it is for her to be able to take care of herself if anything happened. Working in the hotel industry, I always realized how fickle it was, and how one day you can be a croupier making $2,000 a week, and then the next week it's a pandemic and it's really tough. So entrepreneurship was always important for me to teach, and also to teach to women, because it's the women who take care of the families. So if you can take care of yourself, you can take care of your family. And I always ask the question at the beginning of my classes: if your job is to let you go, how will you eat? This semester, it's become a lot more evident because a lot of person's job has let them go. So now it's more important to teach those mothers. Like I have one student, her son is disabled and she's been let go of her job. So it's important for her to learn entrepreneurship so that she can take care of her child. If it's anybody who we know, it's the women who take care of the family. So if they're able to learn entrepreneurship, they're able to take care of their family and leave legacies behind.
No, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because all of you are essentially leading by example. And I mean, all of these issues are so varied and your spaces are varied. And Philippa, you're directly working with young women and girls through your nonprofit organization. And there are some challenges, I'm sure, that you encounter and some barriers that you encounter as you move through that process and as you try to meet the needs of these young women and girls. What kind of sustains you and your leadership? Did I freeze?
Yes, but you're
okay. All right. I don't know. Philippa, did you hear the question?
I don't think this internet connection is going to allow me to actively and consistently participate in this forum. So I don't even know if you guys can hear me right now.
I can hear you. I can hear you right now. Our internet is acting up. Mine is as well. It started before. I think for most people who are on the live for Cable Bahamas, our internet has been acting up, but I can't hear you.
You can hear me now. I'm so sorry. I did not hear the latter part of your question to me.
Okay. That's all right. Go ahead and answer the first part and we'll pick up on that.
I think the furthest that I got was that you asked if, or you mentioned that I was working directly with women
Okay.
and girls.
Right. So you're working with young women and girls, and the question had to do with your leadership style and what it is through your leadership and mentorship work. And I know that your organization is geared towards meeting a need among certain populations, right? And a certain segment of the population of young women and girls. And so, how is it through your mentorship and your work? Do you demonstrate the leadership that you wish to pass on, or you wish for young girls to emulate that isn't necessarily demonstrated in our traditional views about what makes a good woman leader?
Okay, thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. Just to clarify, what we do at the Dignified Girl Project, we do offer a service, but we're more on the service side than we are on the mentorship side. So we do not have a mentorship program per se as yet, but that is something that we foresee our organization doing. As it pertains to my leadership style, well, I'm a catalyst, right? I'm a catalyst. I've known that very early on. So I'm one of those persons who believe in getting things and making things done. So one of the things, 97% of our volunteers at the Dignified Girl Project are females. About the same percentage of our board of directors. We fortunately have one male on our board of directors. But as I lead that organization, what I do is I look among my volunteers or our volunteers, and I also identify catalysts within the organization, because not is it just a succession plan for the organization, but it's a leader being able to identify another leader and presenting them with opportunities for growth and opportunities to lead. So if you have a catalyst within your organization, or if you're led by a catalyst, it's more than likely that the vision and the mission of your organization is going to be fulfilled, because those are the persons that are going to get it done. So it's important for me to do that. It's also important for me to, in this position or role, to speak up and speak out and raise awareness to issues that affect women and girls, not just in the Bahamas, but internationally. Okay, that's important. So it is my hope that young women who are a part of this organization, or organizational women who observe what we do and are aware of what we do, that they too find that they are able to stand up for issues that concern them and issues that put them on equal and level playing field with the men that they are either raised by or growing up with, the men that they work with, they play with, the men that they definitely learn with when they go to school.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And you actually answered the mentorship component. And so when I say mentorship, I'm not thinking about a fixed program necessarily. It's about, so it's about engaging with other people, whether they're older, or whether they're your peers. It's always, possible to convey, your skill set or your wisdom, and for individuals to move beyond that point. So I know, as women leaders, there are barriers, especially if you're going against the grain, and some of us have to contend with this in a more obvious way and a more consistent way than others. And I'm wondering from any of you, what are some of those challenges that you found in your spaces where people are just pushing back against you because you are a woman, advocating for issues that affect women directly? And what has been kind of if there has been any backlash with respect to certain issues that you're trying to highlight? So any of the panelists can take that. Kasarina, you wanna?
I can jump in here. Sure. I think being comfortable with not knowing the answer to things is something that I think is a really important leadership quality. And I, I I have a lot of examples when I'm working with students and they ask me a question and I don't know the answer to it. And I love that. That makes me really happy because I say,
Okay,
well,
I did freeze. Okay,
can you
go
hear
ahead,
me?
Katarina. I froze. I don't think you did.
Okay. I think that there's a perception out there that leaders must know everything. But when we're trying to take an approach for good decision making and science-based decision making, sometimes you have to deal with not knowing things and with uncertainties. And so developing the skills to be comfortable with not knowing the answer to something, but willing to go and find it out, I think is a really important characteristic, and one that I'd like to see happen more often, particularly in our male leaders, but in everyone. I'm saying, well, I don't know the answer to this, and so if I don't know the answer to, what the conch population is in the Bahamas, then I need to go and find the answers, and I need to take a precautionary approach, where I'm erring on the side of caution because I don't know the answer, and nobody knows the answer. And if we get this wrong, then we'll have a major problem on our hands. So being comfortable with that, sort of having that self-awareness to say, I don't know, but I'm going to go and ask questions and reach out to others who may know the answer, and that's okay. I certainly see this a lot in the science field, and encouraging young people to be creators of knowledge rather than just consumers of knowledge is something that we do a lot at Brief. And really getting young people to ask difficult questions. And we run a program at Brief called Eco Schools. It's a global program. There's, I guess, about 90 some countries around the world that are implementing it. And it really challenges young people to be leaders. And when we start implementing it in schools, sort of more traditional schools here, it's really uncomfortable, because children are used to being told information and they're just sort of spoon fed, or have buckets of information poured into them, but they're not being trained from an early age about how to be creators of knowledge and how to ask necessary questions. So this is a really exciting program that my kids actually go to an eco school, and I see them coming home and asking all these questions, and learning about leadership skills. So I think this is something that's uncomfortable for the Bahamas, but that we are growing towards this way of being self-aware. And I think that makes you a better leader.
No, absolutely. I don't know if any of the other panelists wanted to jump in on that, especially as it relates to certain characteristics and, not knowing it all. And I think Ava touched on it a little bit, being comfortable with who you are and showing up as you are all the time. And I think, it's really important that, again, I mean, just reflecting on the way you've moved through this leadership space. And Kasarina, you probably have been involved in this informally from a very early age. And Ava, you mentioned since 2009. Kantisha, you've had that characteristic of, that you had that drive. And as you said, you were very outspoken, and you identify that as perhaps a key leadership characteristic. But there's this notion of power and exercising power that's often not associated with women, especially when we're talking about power over, but when we're talking about the dimensions of power. And some of you already know this, like power with people, collaborating, etc. What kind of power through your own leadership practice do you find yourself exercising? And is it something that you resist, the use of the term itself, or do you embrace it and acknowledge it as something that can be wielded for greater effect? And I think it's also important because when we scale up, for those of you who are engaged in advocacy and in services that are linked towards advancing the rights of women and girls, how do you scale that up, and how do you feature that in your advocacy work and your informal or formal mentorship work? So that's up
So I
to
don't
all
know
of you.
if okay, because I wasn't sure if you were directing it to the activists, but I think it's very interesting. You bring up the notion of power, and how do we reckon with it as women, as women. And I think one of the things that I think my main takeaways from observing Bahamian life is the fact that for the most part we do have this real we have such a unhealthy relationship with the word power, to one, and two, we are basically, I don't want to say we're afraid of it, but there's a lot hanging on women not actualizing their own power, right? Even from a conceptual space. When you have a woman that's empowered, she does not put up with the same level of she has different standards. She has different ways. You can't go back. So once a woman has become empowered and actualized herself, you can't then treat her the same way that you treated her when she didn't know her worth or her value. And I just like to say, I guess to make it more inclusive, femme presenting or a feminine person is everyone. I'm still learning myself. However, I think it's this duality that's present throughout in Bahamian life, right? It's a duality that's present in the church, or our reckoning with religion and spirituality here in a post-colonial society, right? So we have all this power as Black people as well, but as former colonized people as well. But that power is never really actualized. So we have it, we don't really do anything with it, and it shows up in our domestic life, where you note that women hold a great amount of power, of silent power, in family, from the most sort of rudimentary family unit. Women hold an immense amount of power. However, that power is not it's not stated, it's not overt, it's not acknowledged, right? So we don't acknowledge that mommy does the bookkeeping, the cooking, the cleaning, the dressing, and the kissing and the hugging and the holding, right? But there's this sort of ideology that we have to prop up, that the man is the head and the man is at the top of the household and the man is the only opinions that matters. And so with that soft power, that even though daddy says this, mommy is the one who you really have to get it cleared by, because daddy doesn't know anything, right? And even in those, and that seems sort of benign, and nothing's wrong with that. That's a healthy family dynamic. Everyone's loving each other. However, by not actually going out there and saying, and not putting a name on it and saying, okay, mothers run the households, mothers, by not acknowledging the intense amount of, especially in Bahamian society, the unequal balance of how that work is distributed, that labor is actually done, the unpaid labor that is done, because that's not acknowledged, it sort of sits, it doesn't have the same sort of power. And so I feel like we need to not be, and it's basically, it's shameful for women to try and arrest that power. Look at what we've done, how Loretta Butler Turner was demonized for having ambition. Yeah. You know what, she wasn't considered along the same lines of her male counterparts for having the same ambition that they have. You know, it was, for some reason, it was wrong of her to want something more, right? And so, and the way that's characterized in Bahamian society as well, it shows women that are behind us that, look, you have to ride that line. You have to want it, but not own it. Yeah. You know what I mean? You have to, you can't, there's something about a woman that's meek. There's something desirable about having a woman who is just understated, who is humble, who is so beautiful, but yet not knowing of her beauty, right? And why is it that we want women to have that humility? And why is it that who does that serve? It doesn't serve us, you know. It doesn't help with the insecurity. It doesn't help with the sexualization, objectification by men. It doesn't help with our all the things that, you know, we should be shoring up. You know, if more women thought that they were priceless, then we would have a better society, right? Yeah. Because we are the cornerstone of the society. So by by giving women all this sort of fault, you're giving women all the responsibility, right? But none of the task or the tangible power or people to claim their power.
Yeah.
Then we're still doing the work. You know, it's still that we are still laboring for the male gaze, essentially.
Yeah.
And it is important. I think the only thing that's important is how we talk about it, because women are already doing the work. So whether we get to this other stage and break through this glass ceiling, we're already up there tiling the floor, right? Of the upper story. Whether we get to sit at the table or not, we're already doing the work. So it just is a matter of us as women saying, yeah, I run this. Yes, we are women-led society. Yes, women are the cornerstone. Yes, we have a lot of broken homes and we have a lot of men and a lot of issues with toxic masculinity that has led us to this unequal distribution of work in our home life, in our work life, and in all these aspects culturally. And until we take it from that route, I don't think that we'll, pretending like it's not an unequal balance is not going to get us anywhere.
Yeah.
that's how I think about it.
Yeah. So how do we change it? I mean, it's huge and it's so deeply entrenched in our society. So where do we start? And I mean, does the work have to happen concurrently in all of these varied spheres? And how do we scale it up? I mean, because I think many women know this, and what you said, or if I could sum up what you said, it sounded like there's an active or a subtle agenda of disempowerment of women and devaluing, a continued devaluing of women's contributions to society and development. So how do we push back on that? How do we kind of, again, this is about redefining leadership. How do we advocate for a new kind of leadership and make that acceptable to society as a whole? Where do we start?
Lisa, I think given that we're in the context of the Bahamas, I think one of the more important spaces to the average Bahamian in terms of addressing that is the religious space, whatever religious space they are into. Because in particular, for example, the kind of space I'm in, the Christian church space, what Ava was saying remind me directly of what I was saying about the women doing the groundwork in the church, but yet the leadership is given to the men. And then the leadership of the men will say there's not enough male presence in the church because we're feminizing the church. And so that power, that work, that the power that is given to church is given by the women. But again, they're not recognized for it on the level that they should be, and is actually complained about in relation to them taking up too much space in compared to the men who have this right to leadership. So that's I don't even know if you call that a microaggression. It's a pretty blatant aggression. So one of the things that I hold dear to me as a leader in that space is to empower people or to encourage them to be authentic, to foster a spirit of empathy, especially in my congregation, to make it known my position as a leader in terms of where I stand in terms of the matters in society surrounding equality for everyone. I think as leaders, we empower others who are looking to us for that nod. You have a lot of people perhaps in congregations or in society who may share the same views or may have more progressive ideas or even wishes, because okay, you have more people who have these ideas, but again, it's not sometimes until another person, perhaps who they look to for leadership, says it's okay to think this way. And in fact, you should pursue this direction. It's not until they hear that that they know that, or they're empowered to do that. So that's something that's important to me as a leader. And again, it's something that shouldn't be groundbreaking. It's something that shouldn't be this big, different hallelujah moment for the church, but it is. And yeah, it's something. I was talking about the microaggressions because I wanted to speak to the question you asked earlier about the obstacles that we do face in trying to see this come to pass. And it's really tough to see that, going back to what I was saying, everything goes back to what I'm saying about the women's presence in the church, that it's so hard for the church to even embrace something as simple as inclusive language. That, for example, our church, the official version of the Bible is the New Revised Standard Version, which is a more sound textual theological version, and it's more inclusive. But even having worked in Jamaica, having gone to Guyana and all these places, because we have 8 districts around the Caribbean, members will fight so hard to keep this King James version in their worship spaces, in their private spaces, even when they can't even understand the sentence after they have read it in the King James version. But it's so entrenched in society. And even when you are among colleagues, and again, the microaggression of trying to address that issue of inclusive language, and it being seen as, well, why are you making a big deal about this? Because it's a big deal. It's a micro aggression. The thing about not making too big of a deal about addressing these women's issue. And another pet peeve of mine is when we do address the things that women face in our society, is it has to be in the bracket of women and children. But no, women's issues are directly related to the power relationship between women and men in this society, and the dominance that is continually sought by men in our worship spaces, and that translates into their home life. And it's separate from children's issues. So we have to address and also to call out the men in these spaces who are perpetuating these ideals. So it's things like that. It's very frustrating. You have to be careful not to highlight certain things, but I'm not careful about anything. Another thing is the way that we, relating to mentorship, the way that we mentor girls and boys in worship spaces. That I've been to graduations where, and this is not just worship spaces, but where, girls' names are called, but when boys' names are called, they are master so and so, right? Because leadership is pushed on them and thrust upon them as something that they should be entitled to. And all of this, again, in the context of the Bahamas, is coming from and pushed and perpetuated by the religious spaces, because the religious spaces are what inform the household spaces and the school spaces, from the private schools to the public schools. And so as a leader, I'm frustrated, but I try not to back down from my position. And I try to be courageous. And again, what Ava was saying, being determined to take up that space and to not compromise. I'm not saying that I've never compromised, but to an extent, I just again try to be authentic and try to encourage persons now that I have that space of my own. For it to be seen that this congregation is not going to be a congregation that will push people down inside this church or around this church. But if you are saying that you are supposed to be representing the light of Christ in this society, that's what you're going to represent. Not ego, not dominance, not arrogance, but it's goodness and the light.
Aneesah, may I?
Yeah, definitely.
And I absolutely applaud you, Kelly, for what you are doing. I am so proud that I am meeting you in this platform and hearing about the work that you are doing with your congregation. And as you spoke, one of the things that me, when it pertains to not just women leaders, but leaders in general, is influence, right? That's just like fundamental for a leader, influence. And how you are using your influence is so important. Someone asked a question about what are some of the obstacles that women face when it comes to their leadership. And one of the things is, it is religion, right? And you spoke about how religion has its influence on the family structure. So when we talk about, Aneesah, changing the way women is seen in leadership and how power dynamics works out with women, it also goes back to the family and the way we parent and raise our children. Leaders in the, I would say in 2021, leaders in 2020 moving forward, 2020 has showed us one thing with leaders, is that people are no longer settling for the injustices, right? And in 2021, leaders are going to have to be empathetic and sensitive towards the issues that women, men, girls face, and try to find that balance, right? So I just wanted to highlight the quality of influence and what are we using our influence for. It's not easy, but you are being courageous, you are being brave, Kelly, as is many of you women on this panel. And I think that is also what's going to make the difference. You're going to experience the pushback, but you keep going, because there is one person, or maybe more, but that one person is watching you. They watch how you react and how you respond, and that fuels them enough, right, to also stand up, do the difference, be the difference. And I think tolerance and acceptance is something that we need to be aware of also, and be able to appreciate and accept diversity. Okay, when we don't do that, I think that is where a lot of our phobias, right, phobics or whatever, come in. But also being sensitive to that and teaching from very young on our children. So our educational system, our religious system, our family unit, it all starts, like, they're all at the core and at the root of this change that we're seeking and working towards.
Yeah, thank you for that intervention, Philippa. And I mean, it's so interesting because all of these issues are interconnected, and even though you work in different spaces, your views are pretty much. I mean, it's very similar. So someone's asking if I could repeat the last question. And so the question that I posed to Kelly initially, I was asking about certain characteristics and barriers and how to overcome those barriers. And where do we start in terms of creating an environment that's conducive to women's leadership, and what should that leadership look like? So that's essentially what it was. And, you know, and Kelly gave a really interesting response, and she framed it in terms of, you know, the religious dimension in our context, in our specific context. And the public policy dimension is really, really important as well. And Philippa, you mentioned influence. You know, we're in election season, essentially. And how do we ensure that these ideals that we're trying to promulgate, and the society that we're trying to create? You mentioned inclusivity, you mentioned non-discrimination, you mentioned acceptance, respect for diversity. How do we then try to ensure that that is represented in our elected officials, and that those who are being put forth are representing and supporting these ideas as well? I don't know if we have any politicians in the room, but I'll throw that out to you guys.
Accountability. I think accountability is a big thing that we 90-yard dash away from in this country. We have to hold people accountable for their actions when they do good and when they do bad. When you see somebody in society who's actually doing good, you want to praise them for it. And when you see them doing bad, we need to hold them accountable, not vote them back in. When it's time for them to be voted back in, that's when they need to be held most accountable, so that we don't forget, because we have the little amnesia problem every election time.
Yeah, I would jump in and agree with you 100%. It's absolutely essential. And, you know, we're compiling a list right now at Brief of, you know, stands that people have taken, that elected officials have taken on different issues. In the US, you can go, and in England, you can go and you can get a list, and you can look up your representative from wherever and how they voted on any particular issue. And then see whether that aligns with your thought process. At Brief, we held our own election campaign, and we put up flyers. So this shows you how long ago this was, right? Because we put up flyers all over the place with a picture of a grouper and a conch and a little speech bubble that said, "Our fate depends on your MP, choose wisely." And it generated a lot of discussion, and all the radio talk shows were like, well, that grouper looks like a PLP grouper, and but that conch looks like a, an FNM conch. What are you telling me? How are you telling me to vote? And we were very clear that we weren't supporting any particular party, but we did have a list of questions, and we were asking people to ask their candidates, what's your opinion on the Nassau grouper close season? Do you support the establishment of fully protected marine protected areas? Ask these questions and other questions that you may care about, and make your decision on who you vote for based on the issues rather than just the party. And it was really interesting because we had a lot of people who came out after that and said, they made marine conservation part of their platform. And we tried to draw attention to those guys and said, look, this guy says this, this woman says that, let's hold them to that. And, we've never said to vote for any particular party, but just to ask these questions. And then that next step is hold accountable. So I know there have been some efforts to put together some lists on people's stands on various issues. And this is certainly something that I'd be interested in working with whoever would like to going forward.
Well, thank you all for that. And it's that time to turn attention to the audience. I think Erin is first up. So Erin, I think you have a question to pose to the panelists. Go for it.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I also sort of wanted to respond to that particular question. I really appreciated Kazarina's response as well as the first one. And I think it's to sort of engender those dynamics, we need to shift the political culture. Right? Like it goes beyond just holding politicians accountable and not having amnesia at election time, right? Like that, a part of that is shifting the political culture and shifting the electorate culture, right? So we got to shift the way that we as voters engage the politicians and the political parties and the whole process of selecting representatives for governance. Like we have to learn the laws. So when we are expecting MPs to disclose, right? We're expecting it, and then in the House, we get some googly gook about how, well, the documents weren't laid at the right time, and we've given them a 3-month extension. Then we, the people, we can engage the conversation and say, no. We know the law. We can quote the provisions that say that you're not allowed to do that, right? And we can really hold their feet to the fire because we are more informed voters, right? And in that way, we begin to shift the political culture, and we demand of these politicians that you change the way you behave, because the political culture is so overwhelming that we've seen over the last 10 years, no matter who we vote in, right?
Yeah.
No matter what promises they make, they get overwhelmed and consumed by the dominant political culture, right? With the most sensitivity, Romy Fiera was an environmental advocate before he joined when he joined the FNM, and when he won, he was appointed Minister of the Environment. And we thought that was going to mean something real and substantial, right? And the fact that that part of his portfolio or parts of his portfolio were removed may be a testament to the stands that he took in private, right? But until that stand is visible to the voters, we don't know what it is, right?
Yeah.
It just becomes whatever the common narrative says.
Yeah.
And so I think real investment in shifting the political and electoral culture is what we have to invest in.
And
Yeah.
also our
And getting
women
the
politicians as well. We have to hold our women politicians accountable as well for their counterparts as well, and also for educating other party members on women involved problems. I see a lot of the female or the women politicians, when topics come up with women issues, they fall back. Just like Kasarina said, when it's time for them to run, these questions need to be asked. How do you feel about the last referendum, when women voted against themselves? How do you feel about that? How would you have voted? So that we could get that feedback, or we could know exactly how they feel about women and exactly how they feel about themselves. And if they're willing to be able to communicate with their counterparts, to be able to express and say, hey, I am a woman. There's no way you could talk about slapping me down in house. That should not be discussed. So we should be able to have that clear communication with our counterparts, that you have to respect me just like you respect everybody else.
And just putting in a plug for the Freedom of Information Act to actually be implemented. It passed in 2017, but it still hasn't been implemented yet. So we need to have some legislative pathways to be able to get information when it's not forthcoming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are all critical points. And I think when we talk about political will, we don't necessarily invoke the community's political will. And I think mobilizing that behind these issues is really, really critical. We have a question from the chat to our panelists from Dwayne. He mentioned that inclusion is important for progress in a globalized world. What is the greatest challenge to inclusion in the Bahamas? I don't know if Kentisha or Kasarina,
I think
Philippa.
exclusion is the greatest challenge to inclusion here in the Bahamas. I think we just try not to involve and try to separate when we could just include everybody on the same level.
And I do think it goes back to what a lot of what Kelly has shared to answer Dwayne's question. Religion.
Could I add also a lack of empathy in that space and in society in general? That's something that I've been really thinking about lately, that's a big problem of ours. If we were more empathetic genuinely towards other people that, you know, we see as other, it would solve a lot of our inequality problems. Also, I think the great boomer power the power of the boomers, honestly, is a big problem, again, in church, but in wider society. Look at the people that we are willing to allow to lead us still in 2020, the big slate and the age gap. Thanks.
Yeah, Kelly, that was the second time you said 2020. I said it as well, but we're in 2021. We don't need to extend 2020. Yeah, I think another panelist also said it, but I mean, those are really good points. And again, it requires society, and there's so many actors who we need to be involved. But again, it starts with a small group of individuals consistently doing this kind of work and really modeling what it is we mean when we say, you know, what non-discrimination is. We represent a true respect for diversity and equality, and understanding that that doesn't mean that this only applies to a certain group of Bahamians in society, but everyone in society, every human being in society, regardless of our differences. And I think we're very good at polarizing groups of individuals and maintaining, you know, divisions. But I think in terms of redefining leadership, and leadership, you know, it actually works in traditional leadership. Let's alienate this person, let's you know, demonize this individual. And I think there's something to be said for collaboration and working towards that larger end. We may have different solutions, and some solutions may have more merit than others, but we really don't attack, you know, the process. We end up attacking individuals, groups of individuals, and scapegoating individuals. But I mean, I think you all made a lot of really good points, and I'm gonna put it out to the audience to see if anyone has any comments or questions for our panelists.
I had something I just wanted to say. I personally think that a lot of why the Bahamas is really like in the state that it's in has to do with like the fact that we don't talk enough about our history, you know, the history of slavery and, you know, the plantation mindset that we still carry. I feel like the Bahamas, I mean, we know tourism is our number one industry, and I don't think that's by coincidence. I think that's by design. And I think that a lot of the ideologies and the ideals that we perpetuate in our society, like light skin, you know, able-bodied, male dominance, you know, all of these things I think can be traced back to that same plantation mindset. If you think about it, like, I just think that unless we really talk enough about like the history of the Bahamas, and unless we actually learn that in schools, like in high school, junior high, I don't recall like actually learning about it and the implications of what that means in society. So I think that would be a good place to start personally, is actually making social studies about social studies. How does the past, you know, for like, how does the past create the present state that we're in now, and what we need to do to maybe deconstruct some of that so that we can move forward in a different direction.
Absolutely. Do any of the panelists want to add to what Khadija just shared with us? I mean, go ahead.
Coincidentally, over the past week, I've been doing some deep family history. My family are the Bows of Exuma. My grandfather Max Bow had about 41 kids. I don't know who my family is, so I went in to do some research, and I realized that if the women weren't married, you kind of don't know what kid they had, because when you go through the research, it says, you know, Dean child girl. So I don't know if this random Dean woman is connected to the Max Bow guy. So I realized how much the male role played in even the documentation of our history. So even going back to look up our history, it's just so misogynistic still that you still try to trace the roots back to where they really need to be.
Yeah, I mean, so it's really interesting because, you know, again, it's going back to the basics and working concurrently to address the shortcomings in different spheres and different, you know, socialization spheres in society, whether that's politics, whether that's your religious institutions, and really critical is our curriculum in the schools. And, you know, approaching that concurrently. I mean, oftentimes when we talk, we're like, first we need to address this, then we need to address this, then we need to address this. And do we have the time? Do we have 30 years to wait on a different kind of leadership that's conducive to sustainable national development? Do we? And I think Kasarina she mentioned the role of the eco schools, and that's a really good example about how we're designing and getting individuals from a very young age to rethink their ideas about and reevaluate their ideas about leadership. Go ahead, Kasarina.
Yeah, youth leadership is huge. And, you know, I'm always so inspired to see who really get it. Some of the issues that we're talking about, you know, certainly in conservation, you know, you talk to a little kid about catching a fish while it's, you know, pregnant, and they're like, no, we shouldn't do that. You know, some of these issues really make sense to kids. They just have a fresh mind and a fresh way of looking at the world. And, you know, we're seeing it in the Bahamas, and we're seeing it around the world, where young people are taking an active role in leadership. They're learning these skills from an early age. And the reality is this planet belongs to them. I mean, I know it's a cliched thing to say, you know, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, from these boomers. We're just borrowing it from our children, but it's a real thing. And kids get it when we're talking about issues like climate change. And, you know, they're going to be around in 70 years. These old people who are making decisions about the future of the Bahamas, may not be around in, will definitely not be around in 70 years, let's put it that way. So seeing young people step up and really empowering them to step up is a way that we can create an environment for a new type of leadership. So that really excites me, and I want to be fostering that. We do training workshops for teachers where, we're working with teachers to teach marine conservation to, decades of future students. And we're finding that this is a really powerful way of sharing some messages, sharing different ways of learning. And I talked a little bit more about empowering young people to be the creators of knowledge, telling them that they're needed. That's one of the most powerful things you can tell a young person. Not that you must do that, you must do this, but I need your help to do something. And getting them involved in helping others, whether it's people they know, helping people they know, or helping people they don't know, or helping the next generation of people who are coming behind them. I think that somebody brought, I think Philippa was talking earlier about empathy and the importance of building these skills as part of the sort of the education model that we need.
Yeah.
So I think we need to revamp how we're teaching. And incorporate our history and incorporate lessons learned from elsewhere. Sometimes we're very insular and we're like, oh, well, Florida's run out of conch, but that's never going to happen to us. I've heard it, God will always provide conch. And we're like, well, actually, God would like you to be a steward of the environment, and then you'll always have conch. So just kind of thinking around these issues of critical thinking and an education for the world that we want to live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dwayne has a question. Dwayne, go ahead.
My question is in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, so Kasarina, you're really right. You're spot on about us being stewards and thinking beyond, every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. That's a start. If we could actually plan and adhere to plans and aspirations and strategies that are designed for that time frame. And I think, it has to be done in a very collaborative, cohesive way. And we're not talking about, just developing in our own spaces, but how all of our efforts feed into national development. Ultimately, that's what it's about, taking us as a country to the next level and keeping us from regressing. And so I think, that, that's going to be a challenge for a little while, as huge a challenge as it is. But I think, strides are being made in the right direction. Ava alluded to some. Kelly is really frustrated at this point, but as she said, she persists, and I think it's because you see those small wins and you realize those small wins, and you celebrate them and you move on, and you continue to engage. And so Dwayne's question is, what is the character profile of the leader the Bahamas needs today? So I'm going to throw that out to all of you. I remember we're talking about, and I noticed that question is very gender neutral. It is Women's Wednesdays, so go ahead, answer it how you wish.
I think first and foremost, I wanted to just to affirm one of the commenters talking about the legacy of slavery and the fact that it needs to be a more holistic approach to social studies and just basically curriculum and how we teach our story, our history. Starting there, that I agree, I completely agree. That is the only way. So everything that we're doing now, anything that we do, we're adding on a shaky foundation. So while we can make things look pretty on the up top, like we're gonna have to go through this same cyclical process and re-educate ourselves again and again and again if we don't go to the root and fix it there. But I also, in listening to Kasarina, I also I had sort of, in thinking about it, we are educating because there is some education going on, like, Brief has been educating the kids, but I wonder where do we pass the baton? So where do we go from youth leadership youth, educating our youth, to empowering parents and empowering our the people that are the stewards of those young people and that are directing their lives. Because you can go to Brief and have a great escapist sort of time and learn about the environment, go snorkeling and be in this space that's so super great, and then go home to your community where none of those principles are being that you've just learned about, where it's actually maybe not even be safe for you to espouse these values, or even be able to practice that lifestyle that's being modeled for you in this magical place. So how do we bridge the gap? Because I think that baton pass is extremely important, and that's why we're in the cyclical space that we are. Because I think just as you said, the people that are in the House of Assembly right now, our MPs, they did extracurricular activities. They picked up trash. They recycled. They were taught these things. We have a really, really old curriculum. So the same tools that we have, the only thing I think has changed is that the exposure is just so much greater now that we don't have to listen to just one form of education. But how are we protecting that light that we're instilling in our young people? Because somewhere along the way, you've come upon hard breaks. Life is a lot of hard breaks. And if you're not in a position of privilege where you can really have, we tell people that they can be whoever they want to be, but to an extent, your perception is the only thing. How you perceive your environment is the only thing you can really control. You can't be who you can be to yourself, right? So how do we pass the baton on to a young aspirant person, to a teenager that's graduating into an empty job market, or to, how are we giving the opportunities for these young people then to transform what they've learned into cogs in the wheel of society? That's one. And then in terms of the character profile that the Bahamas needs, it needs a woman, right? So that's the first character. That's the first part of the character profile. I don't think gender is a part of your character, but I think that's the kind of shakeup that we need. That's important. That's the kind of perspective that's needed at this time. However, barring that, even in keeping it gender neutral, we need someone that is, one, not afraid of the political status quo. So we need someone because I think that's a big part of it. Our politics is led by fear. So either fear that someone is going to expose you, or fear that you're doing the exposing or you're being exposed. And so when you have that kind of dynamic, that's the kind of leadership that we have. So no one has the balls, which is a sexist term. No one has the sort of political will, right? And that's just what we say about, it's an unlearning process for everyone. No one has the political will because everyone has dirt. And if you've lived as long as some of these people have lived, you're gonna make bad decisions, right? You're not gonna be perfect. And so we need someone that is gonna be able to one, stand up and accept that they've made mistakes in their past, and to continuously have that humility. And I think a woman is perfect for that, because we have to put up with the crap every day and still keep a smile on our faces and still go on and do it. So we are really well versed in being humble, right? Almost as a preset, it's expected of us. So that's why I think that's the character profile. But I think it needs to be someone that is not afraid to have their secrets come out and say, yeah, expose me. And now let's get the work done that needs to be done, because that's not going to scare me off. That's not going to make me back down. That's going to make me sign a back deal because I'm trying to keep a boys club together. You know what I mean? You need someone that is going to, and I feel like that doesn't, we don't have to break the wheel. We don't have to create a third party to do that. We just need to actually have leadership, because that's what leadership is. It's about being unafraid and standing at the front. And when you stand at the front, the arrows all come at you, right? But you got to be Teflon about it. So that's what we need. We need Teflon leadership. And I think that women are Teflon leaders.
Thank you for that response, Ava. And it sounds like a few of your fellow panelists want to, well, not fellow, but your panelists want to chime in on that, about the character profile of the leader, or the leader that the Bahamas needs today. And instead of, recycling, as you mentioned, recycling what we've had over and over again, what is it that we need?
Definitely. I want to chime into what Ava said. Ava had mentioned something about educating and exposing our youth basically to more knowledge and just exposure. I always tell people I may have not been raised in a cookie cutter environment, But somehow my mother exposed me to the environment that she wanted me to live. So I feel like even with our inner cities and with everybody across the board, if we expose people to a lifestyle where women are respected, where we are free to exhibit these leadership capabilities, I definitely think it could change the society we live in.
And I would just certainly reiterate what Ava said about bravery and courage. It's huge. If there's any sort of life lesson that I want to pass on to my children and the children I come into contact with and the people I come into contact with, it's courage. When people say, what skill do you need to be in conservation? I'm like, you gotta have courage, because there's a lot of intimidation that goes on. And I'll speak, one of the issues that Brief's dealing with right now, and a number of partner organizations, is addressing the issue of oil drilling in our country. And speaking out. And, I've been asking questions and say, well, what about the insurance? What about the license fees? Just asking questions, how could this really benefit the Bahamas? Let's talk this through. Let's have an honest consultative process. Let's have public engagement. And the kind of intimidation that's going on is really pretty horrific, I have to say. It's not for the the thin-skinned. So I've got to channel Amanda Gorman, who says, when we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid, the new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And they're powerful words, and I think they're resonating around the world right now. And there's an opportunity to look at this and say, hang on, we all need to be brave. There's always an opportunity for every single one of us to stand up for the things that we believe in. And then people will see us and they will do the same, whether they care about the environment or equality issues, or their street corner and cleaning up their own neighborhoods, or whatever issues, and all of the above. But I think that we can build on bravery, and that we can learn from each other, and we can support each other, and we just need to be brave.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are several characteristics that were mentioned throughout. I know courage, humility, and, just being consistent, being authentic, being who you are. Kentisha said we need more Mia Motleys. Kentisha, please elaborate.
From what I've seen, I'm not a politician and not in the political realm, but I've seen Mia Motley come forward for her people and not her political party on numerous different occasions. And I just like to see when a leader can stand up for their people and not their party, especially a woman leader.
Yeah. Philippa or Kelly, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I absolutely agree. So it all boils down to a leader who is not afraid to champion a cause, right? Not a personal cause, but one that affects the masses. Be brave. So the bravery that everyone spoke about before me, be brave, stand in that bravery, champion a cause, right? And we also need leaders who are passionate about that cause that they champion, and definitely leaders who are creative. Often when we hear the word creativity, right, we think of just the arts, right? But creativity spans everything. Katarina spoke earlier or in the beginning about teaching children how to be creators of knowledge. That's creativity, right? And I believe that creativity is that common thread that is going to provide solutions for a lot of the problems that we face. So definitely leaders that are passionate about championing a cause, I'm hungry guys, as well as a leader who is passionate and one who is creative.
Aneesah, can I come in at this point?
Definitely.
AI, sorry. Just to jump in on that, and the person who wrote Mia Motley, I was kind of reiterating the point I was making in my head, that perhaps it's time for a queer leader. And Ava mentioned a woman leader, but to have a woman queer leader. I think we cover all the bases in terms of being resilient and courageous and knowing what it feels like to overcome all those many layers of adversity growing up in society, as well as being able to empathize, as well as being able to consider the needs of persons in the other groups, for lack of a better word, around you, the needs of other people. And so I think, if by some miracle, some divine intervention, some people heart-changing intervention, the Bahamas could ever come to embrace, and I mean someone who is not self-hating and someone who is willing to embrace that in themselves and willing to work and for other people like themselves in society. That would be a great thing in a leader.
So just if I could respond to Kayla, I was thinking like everybody said, and Mia is a really good example, right? And I just think like every time someone says Mia, I always think to myself, what would we have done with a Mia Motley? How would we have treated her? How would we have made space for her? Where would she have gone to school? Where would she have had lunch on Tuesdays? Like how? And then I think when we take it from there, I think it's important for us to think, how are we creating the space for Mia Motley, our own Bahamian Mia Motley? How are we in our individual lives creating the space for that kind of talent? And to take it a step further, for the desire for queer leadership and and the value of that, because I agree, Kat, I think that would be revolutionary, and it would also, and I think that's also as we get further and further, we become more progressive as a society, we're able to separate people from their sexuality and their worth from their sexuality, right? Because that's the goal, not to have a queer leader, a token queer leader, but to get to that level of equality where someone's value is, someone's sexuality is not a deterrent from their or lesser or more for their value, right? But what space is there right now to keep that person safe as they campaign? What spaces are there to make sure that who's going to stand up for them when they get hit below the belt, or when there's scurrilous accusations, when they're being shamed? What sort of space? And in answering those questions, I think that we can start to build those systems now. So because we're not going to get there by just wanting it. Like each of us in our respective fields, I can say this now, having been on the call with you guys, we've gotten to where we've gotten simply because we've not allowed someone to tell us no, right? Or if we've been told no, we're persisting. That's the general theme, because it's not easy to operate in any of the spaces that we do, but we do it anyway. What would you say to someone? Would you want this life for somebody else? And if the answer is no, how are we making sure that the person that's coming up, I know access to myself too, and it's not. And for a long time, it was enough for me to just exist in the space and be a disruptor. But I also, in interrogating that, I think now it's to a point where it's now more than just being in the space, and so people can see that you're in the space and they know that it's possible to get to the space. Now we have to actually how we doing the drawbridge to the island that we've created, that because we're protected. We have our own bubbles now. We have our own lanes, our own paths. No one can hurt me, or and people can hurt you, but like no one's gonna say my shoes are too dirty and it's gonna affect my job. You know what I mean? How do I make sure that a journalist that's up and coming is even easier for them? How do I ensure there's no and just to piggyback, because I think this is one of the reasons why Equality Bahamas is so important, and the Women's Wednesday event, because through this, there were the last election cycle, there was a voter disenfranchisement of women, and this community particularly, we nipped that in the bud. I mean, I don't think that is in any way a small feat. And it's still something that's going on now, the policing of women's bodies in government spaces. Yeah. that we had to literally clamp down because they were stopping people from registering to vote. But how do we ensure, like, since we've done that, why is there no policy change widespread? We have to continue to create the space and continue to, just because we're here doesn't mean that everyone can get here. Our privileges got us here to some certain extent, right?
Yeah.
So now, how do we ensure that no one needs privilege to occupy the space that we're in? Because I think for Mia Motley, she would need private school education. She would need a personal bank, personal trust. She would need a family, Nassau family company, that would be able to protect her, and she'd have a job regardless if she's in and out of cabinet. You know what I mean? We have to ensure that those sort of things that can't be the order of the day anymore, or we'll never have our Mia Motley, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not for, I think we have to create the space so that someone who is actually of the struggle, who is actually who can actually speak to the people that control the vote, the majority, right? And not the privileged elite. So how are we protecting that person that's going to speak, that's going to be able to craft that message, that's going to be able to cure the ills, societal ills? It's not that it's going to be a one person, but in our quest, in our creating that space, we let the floodgates open for everything, for everybody, really.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And Cheryl Bazard, in terms of the characteristics that are needed, but Ava, thank you so much for that. And you're absolutely right, because, my team members and I often talk about Mia Motley and what she represents in terms of leadership and what we need in the Bahamas right now, or what could benefit the Bahamas at some point, but are we ready for it as a society? And how would we treat it? And how do we build a society that's conducive to a Mia Motley emerging and us really supporting that? And so, Cheryl Bazard, you mentioned sound rejection led by women. Is that in response to Ava's question? What would we have done with a Mia Motley? I don't know if Cheryl Bazard is still on the call. Okay. So I think it might have been. And then you mentioned the referendum and how, women also voted against the advancement of women, and equality of women in certain spaces and valuing women in certain spaces. And so I'm hearing, I think that's, go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I wanted to hop in here because so much of what Ava said, I was just sitting here like, yes, like what would we do with somebody like that? But I also thought about what has recently happened in the US. Like there was this idea that so much progress was made and it was like post-racial US. And then there was the backlash that happened throughout Obama's entire term. And then it was like a swing, a very drastic swing in the other direction. So I wonder, would that be something that we would be facing as well? And then to Cheryl's comment about the rejection led by women, I think that when we have these conversations about things like this, and particularly the referendum, a lot of the blame is put on women as individuals and as a group, as a constituency. And we fail to consider that women are operating and trying to survive within a system that's been designed to keep us down. We've been taught a lot of things. And Ava said, all of us, like we weren't born like this, right? Like we did work to get here. There was a lot to learn and there was a lot to unlearn. Misogyny, we know, is internalized. Racism is internalized. Colorism is internalized. All of these things are internalized. So when we're having these conversations, I think it's important for us to speak to the systems that we're living within, the structures that have created the reality that we have now, and treat those systems with the sort of doggedness that we go at people with, and treat people like they're actual human beings. And find ways to engage them in, that's actually going to be productive. And it's a long road. It takes a long time. And sometimes it feels like you're talking to a brick wall and some people will not come over to your side. It's just not going to happen. Yep. But one way that we definitely don't get all on the same page is by blaming people for the systems that we're forced to live within.
Yeah. Thank you for that intervention, Alicia. And I think a lot of what the panelists said earlier was about dismantling those systems and, rebuilding systems without those dimensions. And, it's going to be hard work, and all of you are living it. All of you are experiencing it. All of us are living it and experiencing it. And at times it seems like, for every one step you take forward, you're taking 13 steps back. And it could seem that way. But, I think that, again, Equality Bahamas, through Women's Wednesdays and other groups that are multiplying and doing similar work, I think eventually, as we chip away at the systems and at certain mindsets, and that's what it is, we can get to a space where Amia Motley isn't going to be so absurd of an idea, to kind of imagine leading our country. And I think, we have a ways to go for sure. But again, this was about redefining leadership, and it's almost it's not even entirely idealistic, because you're doing the work. The work is happening, and it's just about multiplying it, replicating it, duplicating it, and education is key. And that's essentially the bottom line. And so, any final words from the panelists regarding the best ways to equip oneself and sustain oneself as we seek to build or create this leadership that we're seeking?
I'm going to share something that I wrote, but before I just want to say that I don't believe, and I cannot believe in the space that I occupy as a leader. I choose not to believe that all is lost in my generation. I sat in conference recently and actually heard from the wider Caribbean body the exact statement that we want to become a more inclusive church. And just that was enough to give me hope. I cannot say what it means to each individual or how it will be carried out by each leader. I cannot say the complete definition that came from the top, but I can say that it's a step. And it was something that touched me. In this space. And so I'm saying, I encourage all of us in all of our spaces to believe and to stand firm that all is not lost. It will never be lost as long as we are here and we're taking up space. Just to share with you something that I wrote a while back. People tend to prefer women who they can mishandle and have everything remain right in their world. I'm not prepared to be that woman. Most of us nowadays are not, and it costs us people and pleasant lifestyles. It costs us the image of the ideal, acceptable, agreeable woman. And that's fine with me. Those people aren't our people, and it's worth the loss. So thanks again for this space and for the discussion. I really appreciate you inviting me here.
Thank you, Kelly, for your contributions and your insights. They were definitely beneficial, and it definitely enriched this entire conversation and tied in those critical elements of what we need in new leadership and how that looks in certain spheres. So thank you for that. Ava, I think you wanted to jump in.
All right. Okay, so thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate participating the last time you guys invited me. I wasn't able to attend, so I feel like I kind of redeemed myself. I think you had asked, the one thing I would say is, I guess even if you do nothing with your life, you still have an impact on your environment and your society. Everything that you do, I think this is Pocahontas, but it's a ripple, you know what I mean? And so your life matters, and what you do with it, what you choose to do with it, whether that's completely in service to yourself, the divine, or to other people, it's important, and you should have self-respect. I think that's where it starts. Once you can respect yourself, then you can see the value and respect in respecting others and respecting and just carrying yourself with that. And by having that, you are now a disciple, basically. You're out there spreading the word, because people, you do more. I do more activism by just appearing in the space and not actually by saying anything, right? So you, by living your life and being the best person that you can be, you are already making a positive change in the Bahamas. I think that Mia Motley already exists in the Bahamas. She might not look like the way that we want it to be, an easy, clean, completely packaged woman leader. I think it's tokenist to think that we're gonna get a Mia Motley. We won't. We have the leadership that we deserve, and we're gonna continue to have that until we individually demand more. So if you think that you deserve more, then you have to be more. And you have, and like Aaron, just to say, like Aaron said, you have to educate yourself, right? You may be the Mia Motley and you don't even know it. You know what I mean? Because we're going now from where we're not going based on look, we're going based on worth and value and substance, right? And so if you have male, or regardless if you have a womb or not, right? Or if you're feminist, if you're femme or masculine, I still don't really know how we can, make it more equitable. But I think it's so important to continually invest in yourself and boost up yourself and do things that are going to make you feel good, so that you can present that good feeling and give good vibes to the world. So that's what I think you can do to sort of strengthen women's work, basically. Be good.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that, Ava. And it was definitely a pleasure to have you here and hear your insights about, what we can do, what we each can do in our own spaces to build this society, again, that's conducive to this leadership that we've been discussing throughout this entire 2-hour period. I don't know if Kasarina, Kentisha, or Philippa wanted to add. I don't know if you remember the question about the best ways to equip oneself with lead. Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all. And in general, I appreciate the opportunity to interact with people who have different perspectives and who are in different paths and different walks of life. And I think we need to do more of that. I'm fascinated by religion. I'm fascinated by the media. I'm fascinated by, how we can support entrepreneurs. And there's so many connections that I think sometimes people are so focused on their own sort of path that they're not making those kinds of connections that can really strengthen and empower us all. I also think that, having a growth mindset is so important. My favorite word is yet, and everybody laughs at me about that. But I say, well, I don't know that yet, and I don't know how to do that yet. But just really thinking about the things that we can continue to learn throughout our life that make us more powerful, if you want to think about it that way, and make more connections between us and the rest of the world. So we're really taking away that concept of other. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, again, it's a cliche, but there is power in diversity, and from that and harnessing that, I think it leads to positive growth and development that could spill over. Go ahead, Kentisha.
I just want to say thank you for creating this space once again. I just want to chime in basically with what everybody said. Know your value. Like what Ava said, once you know your value, you cannot lose that. No one can take that away from you, because always deep down inside, you'll know your value, and also know ways how to create value for yourself, how to add value for yourself. People always say if you seek a high value person, you want to be a high value person. So you want to find ways to create value for yourself and also to grow within yourself. Like what Kasarina said, growth is a constant process, and it betters us every single day.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Kentisha. Philippa?
I'll go next. So like everyone else, thank you so much, Alicia and your team, for having me be a part of this discussion tonight. And I just want to leave a quote with you by Sheryl Sandberg, and it says, "Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good final thought to leave us with, and it's about, I guess, improving each space and making sure that you leave it better than you met it. And for those of us who have the capacity to do so, I think we're trying to do that to the degree that we can. And as Ava said, it doesn't have to be anything really grand. It need only be positive, and if it's only you affecting you directly, again, it's of value. Well, thank you all for joining us. Remember to follow Equality Bahamas on Facebook at facebook.com. Alicia posted it in the chat, /equality242, and on Twitter and Instagram at equality242. The next session, the next Women's Wednesday session, will be on March 3rd with the theme of pleasure, leading into a whole host of activities for International Women's Day. And the March and Expo that has become a signature piece for Equality Bahamas will be held on Saturday, March 6th, and on Monday, March 8th. And so stay tuned to Equality Bahamas social media sites, and thank you all again.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank you,
evening.
Aneesah.
Thank you, Aneesah, for your amazing moderation. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
All right,
Yes,
thanks.
problem.
so thank you, Anissa.
Thank you.
you
Thank
all.
you for having us.